Hi everyone. We're going to talk about framing quotations properly and inserting them within your writing. So let's get started here. We have an analogy of a quotation being like an orphan. So what does this mean? Many times writers assume that quotes speak for themselves. They've often read the source material and they understand what the quote means and how they want to relate it to their ideas. But just because you know what the quote means doesn't mean that your reader will. It's important to clearly explain the quotes instead. You can think of quotes like orphans. They are words that have been taken out of their original context and have to be integrated into their new textual surroundings. So I'm going to show you an example of a quote in isolation. Self-absorption that seems to be the impetus and embarrassment of autobiography turns into a hunger for the world. So that's an interesting quote, but it's hard to tell exactly how the writer wants to incorporate it in his or her thoughts. There's no introduction and there's no explanation. So to properly do this, we need to create a frame for it. It's something that's also called a quotation sandwich. Here we see the quote sandwich, and there's three parts to this. First, we want to introduce the quote clearly with a topic sentence. Then we would like to state the quote itself, and then we want to explain how the quote relates to your idea. So let's break this down into three parts. First, we're going to introduce the quote. So to do this, we have to create a clear topic sentence, set the scene, tell readers a little context, give them the topic so that they know what's coming next. Second, we're going to state the quote. There's a few ways that we can state a quote or insert it properly into our writing. Let's look at that. So we can introduce the quotation with a complete sentence and a colon. Here's an example on the right. Henry David Thoreau ends his essay with a metaphor. Time is but the stream I go a-fishing in. You can see the first part before the colon is a complete sentence, and the quotation is put in afterwards. Another way is to use an introductory phrase. Here's our example. According to Thoreau, we do not ride on the railroad, it rides upon us. You can see this first part is a dependent clause. It's not a complete sentence. And has a comma here and introduces the complete sentence of the quotation. The third example is to make the quotation a part of your own sentence. The example says, Thoreau argues that shams and delusions are esteemed for the soundest truths. Do you see how the writer integrated the quotation right into his or her own words very seamlessly so that it flows nicely? So after you have inserted your quote, you want to explain it. Well, here's the next part. We have to explain to readers how the quote ties in with our topic idea. We have to show its meaning and importance through analysis. So this is meaning making. You're looking at the quote, how it relates to the topic, and you're explaining it to your readers. You're analyzing it. You're making meaning. You also want to remember that your explanation of the quote should be at least as long as the quote itself. You'd want to be able to give enough of your own thoughts so that the quotations aren't overpowering your writing, that your words are at the forefront. We also want to avoid dangling quotes. So here's an example of a dangling quote. We're going to take the quotation that we used earlier, and we're going to introduce the idea of it without explaining it afterwards. So let's look at this introduction. I wish my grandparents were alive so I could find out their story. But since they're not, I want to write their story myself. Even if it is not the true version, it would be a version and would fill a place in my history. Patricia Hampel describes this well in her article, Memory and Imagination, by saying that self-absorption that seems to be the impetus and embarrassment of autobiography turns into a hunger for the world. So this quote is starting to make a little more sense. The author is saying that she would like to write a story that includes her grandparents. And she has a hunger to know their story. And that's what the quotation is about, is writing autobiography can turn into a hunger for the world. So it ties in nicely there, but we see that she hasn't given an explanation afterward of quite how this fits into her topic idea. Whenever you see a quote in a citation that comes at the end of a sentence or paragraph, this is a warning sign that you have a dangling quotation, and you don't want these. So that is a sign to you to go in and finish framing your quote and explain it to readers. So here's the fully framed quotation. Let's read it one more time. I wish my grandparents were alive so I could find out their story, but since they're not, I want to write their story myself. Even if it is not the true version, it would be a version and would fill a place in my history. Patricia Hampel describes this idea in her article, Memory and Imagination, by saying that self-absorption that seems to be the impetus and embarrassment of autobiography turns into a hunger for the world. Her words so aptly describe my desire to write their story within my own, a hunger for my history and a longing for some kind of connection with the grandparents I hardly had the chance to know. So is this becoming a bit more clear to you as the writer describes her intent? She creates a clear topic here, wanting to write her story and her grandparents' story. She has a quote in the middle that talks about that idea, and afterwards she explains how that quotation fits into her topic idea for her. So it makes the quotation's meaning much more clear to the reader. So why do you want to frame your quotes? Well, this is important because your quotes are supporting your ideas and backing up what you have to say. They can provide evidence for points you're trying to make, but you don't want to let them overtake your writing. You have something very unique to say, you have a unique perspective, and you want your voice to be heard and your ideas to stand out. You don't want other people's words overtaking your writing. So quotes should be there to support your words, but not to overtake them. You don't want them to drown out your voice. And lastly, these quotes can strengthen your writing because they back up what you have to say. It can make your message more effective, and especially if you're using quotations that come from scholarly or credible sources, it shows readers that others share your ideas and they support you. So I hope you can take this framework and use it in your essays, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask me.